and God knows where in the 19th century to attract Eastern Europeans to come work in the meatpacking slaughterhouses of Chicago. The agribusiness in California was distributing leaflets during the Dust Bowl to bring in Okies to work in the California cotton fields and so on. Or you can send out contractors, and these can be private contractors or government ones, but we'll talk about private here. There's plenty of private contractors who know people, who have connection, who recruit farm workers, can recruit construction workers. And of course, if you go through websites, all the different employment websites now, those are contractors. They are making that information available to you. You search on the website, bayareajobs.com or whatever, and you find a job listing and you go through them. They are no different, technically, than a gang leader in agriculture recruiting Mexican field workers down in Sonora. Unions can sometimes recruit labor. They do. The ILWU recruits people into its membership who then become the workers. Temp agencies, of course, are huge recruiters, and many of you, that's the way you will go to work. There is the oldest and most reliable system, in some ways our most general system, is word of mouth. And especially for people at the lower ends of the labor market, the bottom portions, they do most recruitment is by personal networks. And this can go all the way back to home villages in the Philippines or in Guatemala or in Italy in the 19th century. And it works very well for employers. And then government's going to be cutting the deal. California agribusiness relied for 30 years on braceros, which was a government contract between the U.S. government and the Mexican government. Japanese first came into the United States through a government-to-government treaty and contract to bring Japanese farmers from poor parts of southern Japan to work in sugar plantations in Hawaii, which, of course, as soon as they could, many of them got the hell out of there and came to California to grow raspberries or whatever. There can be recruitment through student networks to universities. English universities recruit students all the time in Hong Kong, some of whom end up staying in England to work, and so on. Migration streams are a very big topic in sociology and anthropology these days. They tend to be studied independent of the economics of it, but they're very much tied in with the economics. The economists tend to emphasize wages and labor demand and so on, and the sociologists, anthropologists, the networking and the migration streams. But the two are related, because what happens is you start recruiting people, they come to a company or a town or a farm, they then, if the jobs are there and the wages are okay, and they feel like it's a good enough deal, may not be a great deal, but a good enough deal, they're going to write home, call home, email home, whatever you do, and tell your friends, tell your family. Maybe they're going to try and bring the wives and kids in, bring their nephew, their cousin, whoever. And this happens all the time. You get these tremendous social networks. And when a migrant comes in, a family member may find them their first job, find them their first place to live, set them up, tell them where to go shopping, where to eat, and so on. And there's all kinds of networks like this in a place like San Francisco's Chinatown, or in West Fresno among Mexicans, or in the Mission District among Nicaraguans, especially back in the 1980s when Nicaraguans were pouring in. So it's support systems as well as recruitment systems. But it's like a siphon in the sense that you just want to suck on one end of it and get the flow going. Maybe an employer will start that. And then the thing just keeps going because the people just create the siphon. And it can be very, very specific between one village, one town up here. There are studies like this that show that workers in San Mateo County, in South San Mateo, all come from one village in Michoacan. Or Mixtecans that are working on a certain farm in the Salinas Valley all come from a certain village out in Oaxaca, and so on and so on. There's plenty of studies that show how specific this is. And that's been true, by the way, for 200 years at least. I got the best map I could find of this. This is actually a map of people sending money home. But it really tracks from state to state in Mexico where people are going. And you'll notice that the West Coast sends mostly to California, although by the time this map was done, we're not so much in the north, although California used to get Sonora and Sinaloa mostly, whereas people from Chihuahua would go into Texas. But you can see a lot of people in the newer migrations are heading out into New England, into Chicago, into the South, where the newer Mexican migration is. And of course, that's why people in those areas are doing exactly what we did in California 20 years ago, going, oh my God, where did all these people come from? Because the labor migration, the labor siphon changed. This map is not quite as good, but there are these specific migrant streams from nation to nation, which is what this is showing. So there are Filipinos coming into the United States, mostly as nurses, but a lot of the major stream of Filipinos would be into Hong Kong or Singapore or around to Dubai and the Middle East. And migration also goes in waves. Another reason we know it's driven by labor demand is the temporal pattern. This is an old chart. It's not extremely eye-friendly, but it's about California from 1900 to 1950, and it shows three major waves of migration, corresponding to three major waves of growth. Pre-World War I, blech. 1920s, the Great Depression. World War II, post-war downturn, and then it took off again. That's as far as that one goes. But here's another chart we did a few years ago. That's World War II. And this is net migration. And this, by the way, includes domestic migrants as well as foreign. And in this World War II, they're mostly domestic. And they're from the South, they're Okies, they're from mostly the South and Southwest. Then this migration is from all over the United States, and it's mostly white with a certain number of African Americans. This migration is almost entirely Latino and Asian. Notice, by the way, you may have thought, oh my God, where did all those brown people come from? But if you lived in 1960, you would have gone, oh my God, where did all those white people come from? Kind of the same way the Indians felt back in 1860. Yeah.
Is it clear what's happening currently with the Great Recession and how that's changing?
Yeah, I've got a graph on that, actually. So they move with business cycles that responds to major waves of growth in labor demand. Okay, so dynamics of migration waves. Demand-led upswings during waves of capital accumulation. Labor supply, now I want to complicate this a little bit because labor supply gets its own momentum, and the success, as people hear about it, they're pulled in, and it flows. But then often there's a lag response. So it takes a little while to get the migration up to speed, and then you'll get a downturn, and it'll often take a while for it to adjust. But now this is an interesting chart. This is some guy who did this off some blog, 1820 to 2000, showing the economic downturns. These are graphs of legal immigrants. Notice this is an anti-immigrant guy, I think, over time. Okay, and of course, immigration nearly collapsed in the 30s and 40s for three reasons. One was the cutoff of immigration legally. Secondly, the Great Depression, so we didn't need them. And thirdly, the war. So those were all just killed immigration. And then it takes off pretty dramatically after that. This is all U.S. You can see that the absolute all-time peak was around 1910, just in case you think there are too many Mexicans around. It was in those days, everybody said there's too damn many, wogs and kikes and spics and whatever words they had for them then. Yes, ma'am. Oh, they cut off? 1924, there was a law that cut off all legal immigration. It did allow some Filipinos and Mexicans still to come in. And one was the Depression, and one was the war. Those are the three. Why do you get this huge dip here? Okay, but you can notice that although there's some longer-term patterns of accelerating European outmigration, and here too, kind of enlarging over time, you see the waves really clearly. And this guy has happily pointed out the downturns. And the downturns pretty clearly correspond to blips in immigration. Now, he actually did this to complain that the immigrants didn't stop coming from 2000 to 2004 even though there was a downturn. But in fact, that downturn, despite the financial collapse, was bad in California, but it wasn't very bad elsewhere. So he's probably wrong, and the immigrants were probably not that senseless. But you can see very clearly in charts of migration into California that when we had our huge collapse in Southern California, 1990 to 93, immigration really took a nosedive. You also got on top of that out-migration to places like Nevada to find jobs in Las Vegas. Okay, so there can be supply overshoot. People, it's not a perfect correspondence. Now here's a chart of apprehensions at the border by ICE, the INS, the Migra, and versus employment. Okay, and this is 1991 to 2009, showing that when employment peaks here, you tend to get a peak in apprehensions. Now this is a peak around 2000. The apprehensions are pretty correspondent. And actually, I think that other graph guy was wrong because if you look at this, labor demand does fall off after 2000, and guess what? Border crossings fall off. Then it picks up. Then they get the collapse, and look at border crossings. So your question is answered. They respond quite clearly to these cycles. The only one that doesn't look like it corresponds is here in the early 90s, but you'll notice there's a lagged peak. It was a pretty deep trough. There's also a big trough in California. I think people started going elsewhere, and it seems more lagged there. Now, it's not a perfect correlation, but it's a hell of a good correlation, the eyeball. I have to say, in addition, how immigrants feed growth. Because immigrants come and they fill jobs, they help make profits for employers because they're usually hardworking, cost less than domestic labor by and large. That's always been true. So they augment your profit rate, and then they turn around and spend their wages on food and so on, and ultimately on houses and whatnot, and you get multipliers. So having people to fill your jobs as jobs grow is a good thing, right? And if you don't make babies and college graduates fast enough, or high school graduates, whatever, you have to have immigrants. Now, it is true that there are times and places where migrants displace domestic labor. You can find examples of that very clearly. It was pretty sharp in parts of the early 1980s in California, and then it kind of tailed off, because once those people were displaced, then you saw that new migrants were mostly filling new jobs, not displacing old workers. So I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but when you do see that migrants are taking away jobs, it's almost always because they're trying to get cheaper, more pliable labor. And because we've had this class struggle in which employers have been trying to get cheaper, more flexible labor for the last 30 years, you can imagine that they use immigrants in part as a tool of that. So you have to look at employers. And what happens is you just say, well, there come the Mexicans, they displace African Americans, it's their fault, without actually looking at what the employers are up to. So the employers always mediate this. But if you look at the long run, the long term, the big picture, who built America? It's obviously immigrants. You know, because you killed all Indians or drove them out. So they didn't do it. Well, they were African American slaves, but they were immigrants too, by the way, just not the voluntary kind. Like I said, violence and the market. But when you look at the North and the West, it's overwhelmingly voluntary migrants. And they built the country. This country did not suffer because of immigration. A lot of countries say, oh my God, here come immigrants. The Swedes are just horrible about this. But in America, we do have a somewhat of a balance between people who understand that everybody's an immigrant and people who go, oh my God, where did all these brown people come from? Anyway, I like this little cartoon. Plymouth Rock, first landing place of the first illegal immigrants. So true. So true. And, of course, there's a lot of backlash, so I just threw this slide in just because I had to mention that, because we're living in a time, again, where there's a tremendous backlash. The number of deportations last year was 800,000. It's just criminal, and the Obama administration is worse than Bush, which is another disappointment, to say the least. Bush was actually pretty good on immigration, but he shut his trap after a while because we're getting him in trouble with his own party. Because in Texas, and Rick Perry, remember how Rick Perry got in trouble? Because he has a DREAM Act, and he supported that, and the right-wing Republicans started booing him and everything. Because in Texas, they have so many Mexicans, and so many immigrants. Now, you go to Houston, it looks like the Bay Area. So many immigrants that a rational capitalist in Texas knows damn well that immigrants are good. They keep the labor costs down, and they allow Texas to boom. And that's his whole platform, right? So the Texas capitalists, even the conservatives, like Bush and Perry, are not really anti-immigrant. And yet, when you go beyond Texas, everybody's anti-immigrant. Now, California is no longer particularly anti-immigrant, right? But it was 20 years ago. So there's kind of different kinds of fears. There's the fear that they're going to take your job, and I address that. Yes, a few, but not up to a point. And in some cases, yes, people get hurt. But in the long run, it's been a benefit. Then there's the Malthusianness that people are just pouring in the United States because they have babies. And everybody wants to live in the United States, which is absolutely wrong. Most people don't want to live here. Then there's people who just think that foreigners contaminate our white purity. That's an old racist, but it's also chauvinist. It's about nationalism and racism both. And the fear is all exaggerated. I'm sure there's a poll like this in the U.S., but in the U.K. recently there was a poll, and the average number of percentage of immigrants people thought there were in Britain is 23%. That's a quarter of the population, when in fact it's 4%. And it's like this polls in the U.S. You ask white people how many black people are there, and at least 40%, and they're coming to get me. And it's just, the kind of ignorance and exaggeration is all about fear, chauvinism, and it's played up at certain political moments. It's a very politicized thing. It isn't just that all white people are stupid and racist. It's also that they get played for it. People get played for this. And of course, one of my favorite all-time movies is Lone Star. Anybody seen it? You should see it. There's this great bit about the Mexican woman who's anti-immigrant. There's plenty of those, because she got in earlier. Okay, global competition. What better speed it up here? Here I go again. Okay, 4 categories under global competition. Labor competition, global gut, glut, capital moves, labor upgrades, and a moving front. Okay. Global labor supply is clearly expanding. With the advance of the market, the bow wave of capitalism, primitive accumulation, displacement from agriculture, in Asia, we have the biggest release of people from farming in the history of the world. And so this is quite impressive. I mean, it's going on all over the world. But, in the Americas, this is mostly over, largely over. Not completely, but largely. From Mexico to Argentina. And certainly in the United States. But in Asia, it's just starting. And it's going like wildfire in China, particularly. When people get displaced from agriculture, the standards of living tend to be very low. The wage rate tends to be that they will accept is very low. Add to that when you come out of agriculture, agrarian system, there's often very heavy patriarchy. The first labor recruits in textile mills in the United States, in light industry and textile mills in Korea, in factories in South China, in factories in Malaysia, it's always women. And it's the daughters of farmers. And you bring them in, put them in dormitories, very paternalistic, and most of them have to send their money home to support family and so on, and they make a terrific, cheap, and docile labor force for about a generation. And then the overall, just the numbers of global workers. One estimate I read is the global working class has doubled since 1990. So what does that do to wages? If you've got supply and demand on a world scale, that ought to drive down wages. And of course, the global surplus labor army ready to take your job has gotten bigger and bigger, as Karl Marx predicted. But of course, he was wrong, an old commie, so he must have been wrong. But it seems to be right. And that pressure of the global labor glut is being felt. Clearly in Europe and the United States, they are feeling the pressure of competition of firms and products made working and workers working in conditions with much lower wages. As I said on the last slide, the average wage in China is about 2.5% of the average wage in the United States. Now, talk about national wage differences. That makes a difference if your labor, especially if you're in an industry where the labor share of cost is high. So we've seen that the average wage is falling. This is wages as a percentage of national income across the whole G10 from 75 to 05. And it's pretty clearly down. Now, don't forget what I told you about. Of course, there's class struggle to drive this down and get more profit share. That is independent. It's an independent variable of this, except that the two interact. If workers are weakened, capitalists have a better chance of grabbing a bigger share for themselves. And it's all about who can grab, and who can hold the line, who can fight for more or not. And it's fair, the data is very clear that it's the bottom 20% of workers in the United States who are the most affected by international labor competition. They have the least advantage in terms of education and skills. They are competing at the low end where cheap labor countries have the biggest advantage. So they're the ones who have been the most hurt. Quite disastrously. Okay, capital moves. Now, capital takes advantage of this. Okay? You've got to look at the employers. Capital takes advantage of this. You can take advantage by importing goods from cheaper countries. Instead of buying toys in America, you buy toys from Taiwan or from South China or from wherever, Bangladesh, and bring them into your store, and lo and behold, they're cheaper. And people come to your store because they're cheaper. It's the Walmart strategy in gross, although Walmart subcontracts specifically. Here I'm just talking about general competition by trade. Country exports from a cheaper labor base, it can have an advantage. And actually, the advantage of external goods has much more of an impact on American labor than does immigration. The myth that immigrants are taking away the work is really there's a much smaller impact, and I'll come back to them, than the impact of simply losing industries like textiles completely and garments almost completely because they're now in Bangladesh. And of course, conversely, this is how poor countries compete. This is how they get onto the roller coaster, onto the escalator of industrialization. First, get a toehold is through cheap labor. So that's what they've got. That's what they use. They've also got resources. We'll come back to that. You can also access labor by more systematic outsourcing offshore. And that's been very popular in electronics, where you're not trying to get just cheap goods, but you are trying to cheapen your production and keep your profit rates up and so on. And in some cases, they actually move factories abroad. But in most cases, it's subcontracting to factories, Taiwanese factories, or Philippine factories, or whatever it might be. There also is some direct labor contracting, where you literally hire people directly or through a temp agency abroad to work on your phone answering system or whatever it is. It's not a contract with the firm. It's a contract with, well, a temp agency is a kind of firm, but it's with labor recruiters rather than with an organized company. And of course, the last way you can access cheaper labor in this new world is to allow cheaper labor to flow in as immigrants. And in fact, this is the way the U.S., in particular, but also Europe, have in part remained competitive in certain fields, is by having lots of immigrants. So immigrants have actually aided the U.S. in a world of more intense competition from a larger labor supply, a cheaper labor supply around the world. And by the way, there's a study by David Card here in the business school that regional wages, average wages in the U.S. tend not to be affected by the number of immigrants in those regions. And we have unskilled workers, we have skilled workers. And of course, skilled workers, when we talk about mass immigration and cheaper labor, we tend not to think about Indian engineers or Filipino doctors and Chinese dentists. But we have plenty of those. Yeah.
Would the median wage be affected by the influx?
It has been affected. It has been affected, but it's mostly at the bottom. Are you talking about an influx of immigrants?
Yeah.
No, the data actually, there's study after study after study, and I should have put it up here, that actually, again, it's the lowest 20% that has taken any hit from immigrants, and by and large, the rest not. The biggest hit on you people is going to be outsourcing skilled work to India or China or wherever. That's where the skilled white-collar laborers, which most of you are going to be, you're not going to be ditch diggers or pipe makers or something. And that's where the hit has come. And electronics is really good at doing that. Okay, labor upgrades. Well, don't feel sorry for the rich countries. Oh my God, we're suffering from world competition. Well, get with it. Compete. And they can compete. In fact, the rich countries have all the advantages. They've got masses of skilled labor, highly educated, huge research labs, incredible infrastructure. Everything is on the side of the advanced countries, which is why it's always kind of amazing how new countries can get onto this escalator, get a foothold. And it's all not so amazing why many of them cannot. And for many years before the boom in Asia, the common view in the post-war world amongst a lot of, especially lefty intellectuals, was that,